If you heard that 4 children had driven 13 housekeepers to quit in just 10 months, what would you think? Mischievous kids? Or a hopeless family? But when the father is a single millionaire, sitting alone in a cold, empty mansion in Aspen, powerless before his own children, you would realize, this is not just a story. This is a silent cry for help from 4 children who blame themselves for their mother's death. And then, a waitress appears, no qualifications, no miracles, but carrying the one thing they truly need, understanding. Their names were Ryder, Finn, Theo, and Ollie Wyatt. Ryder was 14, Finn 11, Theo 9, and Ollie, the youngest, just 6 years old. They lived with their father, Carter Wyatt, a successful real estate millionaire, in a luxurious home nestled among the snowy hills of Aspen, Colorado. The house had once been filled with the sound of footsteps, morning piano melodies, and laughter that carried all the way out to the snowy yard. Until the day Elise, the children's mother, died suddenly on a short flight home from New York. She had promised to have a final decent conversation with Carter when she returned. But her heart stopped at 34,000 feet in the air, and her 4 children never had the chance to say they were sorry. From that day on, something in the house had died with her. Carter tried to be the anchor, to stay calm, to keep his children from breaking apart. But the more he tried to be strong, the colder and more unfamiliar the home became. Dinner was no longer a place of connection, but a silent meeting. The once friendly, vibrant children had become 4 fortified strongholds, cold, intelligent, and tactical. They did not cry, nor did they ask why their mother had died. They simply began pushing away every adult who came near. The first housekeeper left after 1 week. The second quit when she discovered Ryder had booby-trapped her closet with water-based paint. The third had all the spices in the kitchen swapped by Finn, turning scrambled eggs into a meal of tears. The fourth, the fifth, the sixth, each left with nearly the same words. I don't know what I did wrong, but clearly, I'm not welcome. Carter did not give up. He hired 5-star rated candidates, former nannies from political families, even life skills teachers for special needs children. But no one lasted more than 2 weeks. Some left in the middle of the night without a note. Others tried to remain composed, but their eyes said what Carter could not bear to hear. Your children don't need help. They are punishing. The children didn't scream. They didn't smash things. Every move was planned, coordinated, and executed with precision. Ryder was the strategist, Finn the silent enforcer, Theo the creative disruptor, and Ollie, despite being the youngest, was the one who could lower an adult's guard the fastest. No one truly knew why they were so defiant, but Carter felt something slipping quietly out of his grasp. Each time he passed Elise's bedroom, the one locked since the day she died, he hesitated. He had never opened the door, never mentioned her once since the funeral. Not to his children, not even to himself. Perhaps he believed that if he didn't talk about it, the pain would simply fade away. But what he didn't know was that when grief goes unnamed, it finds another way to speak through actions. And these children, bright, fragile, and never taught how to mourn, were using every means to say they were hurting. The problem was, no one understood that language. Could anyone stay calm enough to hear the cry for help hidden behind the chaos? The answer will keep you from looking away. Everyone said Carter Wyatt was a lucky man. Early success. Financial security. A stunning home perched on the slopes of Aspen, with glass walls opening to a view of snow-covered pine forests in winter. But few knew that, since his wife's death, that house had become a place no one wanted to stay for long. In less than a year, 13 housekeepers had walked through the wrought iron gates of the Wyatt estate, and every single one had left before they could even remember the full names of the 4 children. Each came with a promise: patience, affection, professionalism. But within days, they left with a fear they never put into words. Martha, 58, who had once worked at an orphanage in Vermont, entered the house confident that no child could ever get under her skin. But by the 5th day, she left quietly, after discovering that Theo had rigged the washing machine to spray cold water, and Ryder had changed every alarm on her phone so she woke at 3 a.m. 3 nights in a row. A young college student wiped sweat from her brow as she recounted being locked in the laundry room with heavy metal music blasting at 90 decibels. Another discovered that the kitchen microwave would only work if you entered the correct sequence of over 15 digits of pi, a gift of intellect left by Ryder. And Ollie, young but razor-sharp, would often fake a fall, scream for help, then burst out laughing the moment an adult rushed over in concern. No one dared to scold them. No one had the strength to be angry, but they could not endure it. Carter could not understand. At work, he could read every growth chart, analyze the smallest market fluctuations. But in his own home, he could not measure the depth of hurt spreading quietly through those cunning little acts. They were not born of mischief, but of a bottled rage, one that could find no outlet except in punishing others. He had tried many things: giving Ryder more responsibility, establishing a morning routine for Finn, enrolling Theo in art classes, even taking Ollie to a child psychologist. But nothing changed. Everyone who came close was pushed away, as if the children were guarding a secret no one was allowed to touch. In the end, Carter began to fall silent. He spent more time in front of his computer screen, slept less, and let life in the house play out like a wordless, mournful piece of music, fragmented and slow. Housekeepers came and went as if part of a routine. No one expected anything anymore. Not even him. One day, Claudia, the longtime house manager, stepped into his office, holding a worn-out contact list. "We don't have anyone left to call," she said softly. "I've tried them all. No one is willing to take this job anymore." Carter said nothing. He simply nodded and turned back to his screen. But deep inside, something in him collapsed. The part that believed he could turn things around. The part that hoped that, with enough time, his children would go back to normal. But cracks do not disappear with waiting. And perhaps the most painful truth was that his children, Ryder, Finn, Theo, and Ollie, knew it too. They didn't need another housekeeper. They just needed someone who wouldn't leave. But does a person like that truly exist? Comment 1 if you think this story is worth hearing, so we know you're still here. When the list of housekeeper candidates had been crossed down to the very last name, Carter Wyatt no longer held out hope for calls or email recommendations. Instead of searching for someone new, he began reorganizing the home's security system, adding more cameras in the hallways and changing all the access codes to ensure that, if things fell apart again, at least he wouldn't be caught off guard. Carter didn't believe anyone could change the situation. But fate, as always, chose to arrive from a completely different turn. One weekend afternoon, over coffee with an old college friend now running a community service center, Carter heard the name Maren Cruz for the first time. Not from a list of professional candidates, not from an elite nanny network, just a name, uttered hesitantly in a single line. "I know someone unlike anyone you've ever hired. Maren Cruz, 26 years old, a part-time waitress at a roadside diner west of Denver. No educational degree, no childcare certification, no shining resume like the ones who had come and gone from the Wyatt home. But there was one thing people remembered about her: her eyes. The eyes of someone who had once stood on the other side of loss, yet refused to let it define her forever. Carter stayed silent as he listened about this young woman. At first he brushed it aside, but a part of him, the part exhausted from hoping, began to think, maybe it was that very imperfection his children needed. Their first meeting didn't happen in an office or over Zoom, but on a wooden bench behind the small diner, where Marin was wiping tables and getting ready to clock out. She wore no makeup, her hair tied neatly at the back, her uniform creased from a long shift. Yet her eyes, when they met Carter's, didn't flinch, didn't judge, and didn't try to impress. She didn't speak much about herself, but every word she said carried weight. Marin didn't tell him she had spent 12 years in the foster care system. She didn't tell him she had moved through more than 8 different families, or that she had endured long, suffocating dinners in homes where everyone smiled, but no one listened. She didn't tell him, but her eyes carried it all. Carter had seen many kinds of eyes in his life, from people who wanted to convince him to invest, to those seeking validation, to those who simply wanted a job, but Marin's were different. In them was a stillness he hadn't seen in anyone else. Not the stillness of sorrow, but the quiet of someone who understood pain, yet refused to be consumed by it. She didn't promise to change the children. She made no verbal guarantees. She only said one thing: "I know what it feels like to be left behind. If you'll let me, I'll stay until your kids believe they won't be abandoned again." And somehow, that simple, unadorned statement became the most honest thing Carter had heard since Elise's death. He nodded, not because he was certain, but because he was so tired he had nothing left to lose. He handed her the house keys, gave her control over the children during working hours, and set no expectations. Only one request: if you ever feel you can't take it, please tell me before you leave. Marin nodded, but deep down she had left too many times in her life, and this time, if there was anything worth trying, it wasn't how to get out, but how to stay. But would staying alone be enough to break the icy walls the 4 children had built? Don't look away, because what happens next will be unlike anything Carter or Marin herself has ever prepared for. There was no welcome for Marin Cruz on her first morning at the Wyatt estate. No shy smiles, no curious glances, no polite questions as she had once imagined. Instead, there was a cold, heavy silence so still she could hear the soft hiss of the heater behind the stone wall. The once grand kitchen now felt empty. Marin stepped inside, opened the refrigerator, and found a note stuck with a magnet. "Welcome to round 14. No signature, no explanation, but she knew it was Ryder. The test began the moment she set her apron on the kitchen counter. The microwave blared chaotic rock music every time she opened its door. The oven malfunctioned repeatedly, burning anything she placed inside. While she fumbled with her first attempt at toast, she discovered the salt and sugar had been switched. The coffee was mixed with vinegar, and the sweet cereal box had bits of sawdust stirred into it. She didn't panic, she didn't snap. Marin simply turned off the music, replacing it with a warm indie playlist she used to listen to during late-night shifts. Then she started over. No rushing. No irritation. Just an ordinary woman in an extraordinary household, choosing not to react like those before her. On the sink, she placed a handwritten note. No sweets, only someone sweet enough to forgive. That breakfast was left almost entirely untouched. But the next day, she noticed the banana peel was gone from the plate. A sign, small, but real. In the days that followed, the tactics escalated. Finn set her alarm clock back an hour, nearly making her late for breakfast prep. Theo plastered caricatures of Marin all over the laundry room door. Ryder kept his expression frozen, occasionally throwing her an unreadable glance, and Ollie, frighteningly clever, scribbled on the window glass. "Did you come here to be defeated?" But Marin was not easily defeated. She had grown up in homes where people only looked at you when they needed to criticize. She had learned patience from the very days she'd been left behind, not because someone taught her, but because no one ever came. And just as she had once waited for someone to understand her, now she chose to be that person for these children. She didn't strip away their mischief. She didn't scold. She responded with things so ordinary they were almost strange, folding their clothes according to each boy's favorite color, placing a jar of wildflowers on Finn's study desk, quietly replacing the laundry room drawings with a peaceful landscape Theo had once forgotten there. Ollie was the first to break. One early morning, as Marin was wiping the windows, he tugged her sleeve and handed her a scrap of paper, a sketch of Marin standing beside a pine tree with 4 children gathered around her. "I'm not good at drawing faces," he mumbled before running off. But the paper stayed. A few days later, Theo left a single sock in the laundry basket. As a test, she mended it without a word. The next time, Theo brought her an entire pile of clothes, asking her to show him how to fold them. Finn began asking her for the banana bread recipe, then pretended to forget so she would repeat it. Ryder remained silent, but instead of avoiding her, he stayed closer, watched more intently, and once, she caught him playing her playlist when he was alone in the garage. Marin didn't celebrate. She didn't indulge in illusions. She knew she was walking on a frozen lake where one wrong word could make everything collapse. But step by step, those tiny changes were proof. Proof that somewhere deep inside these boys, something no matter how small was beginning to crack, a fracture of light. My dear viewers, stay tuned for the next part that will leave you in awe. Take a second to like the video, subscribe, and leave a comment below to tell me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always a joy to see someone joining us from all around the world. That afternoon's rain wasn't heavy, but it was relentless. Tiny droplets streaked down the large living room window, blotched and uneven like old memories that had never been wiped clean. The house was unusually quiet. No traps, no mocking laughter or pounding footsteps like every other day. Only the sound of rain and a heaviness that seemed to hover in the air. Marin was folding towels in the laundry room when Ollie walked in. No running, no mischief. He climbed onto a chair, sat with his knees pulled to his chest for a long while, then suddenly spoke softly, his voice as if pulled from somewhere deep inside. "Marin, if that day Mom had gone to buy the cake earlier, instead of waiting until after the fight, would she still have had the accident?" In that moment, time seemed to stop. Ryder, standing in the hallway on the other side, immediately turned. His eyes darkened, not out of anger at his brother, but out of fear. Fear of it being mentioned. Fear of the truth being dragged out from where he had buried it for 2 years. "Ollie, stop." Ryder's voice was low and taut, like a guitar string on the verge of snapping. But Marin didn't back down. She didn't rush to soothe Ollie. She didn't silence Ryder. She simply set the stack of towels down, turned toward them, and spoke in a steady, certain voice warm enough for both to hear. "You're not blaming your mother. You're just asking something you've been wondering, long before you knew how to put it into words." That sentence wasn't the door swinging open, but it was the first crack in the wall of ice Ryder had built over the past 2 years. He said nothing, but he didn't walk away. And he didn't stop his little brother again. That afternoon, no one forced anyone to talk. But slowly, bit by bit, the long-buried secrets began to slip out, not in tears, but in a chain of silences. Finn spoke of the moment Elise stepped out the door without ever looking back. Theo admitted he had yelled at her during dinner that night, and that the last thing he said was, "Why don't you just leave?" All 4 children carried a piece of a memory no one dared speak, because each believed they were the reason Elise left and never returned. They hadn't just lost their mother. They had been living under the false belief that her death was their fault. And from that self-blame, they had built everything. The games of defiance, the trials for the adults, the acts of resistance not to be noticed, but to punish themselves. Because if no one could bear to be around them, then maybe they deserved to be left behind. Marin didn't try to erase that pain. She didn't say the scripted lines like, "It's not your fault," or "Your mother always loved you." She knew that sometimes what children need is not comfort, but someone willing to sit beside them in silence as they face the truth. She said only one thing small, but like a spark in a dim room. "You're like wounded animals, biting into your own leg because you think it's the way to pay. But the deeper the wound, the harder it is to heal. You're not alone. Not when someone is willing to stay." And for the first time since she arrived, no one argued, no one retreated. The house was still quiet, but it was no longer the silence of coldness, it was the silence of something beginning to crack, something that, until now, had never been named. A shared pain, but also a shared chance to heal. Would Ryder, the one holding the deepest secret, have the courage to face his true feelings? Stay, because the most important part of this journey is about to be revealed. Change never arrives with a loud crash. It often seeps into life through small details, quiet as a flower blooming in the middle of winter. And in that once cold house, what was blooming wasn't noisy joy, but life itself. After that rainy afternoon, there were no more pranks, no more threats, wary glances, or elaborate traps set in the kitchen and hallways. Instead, Ryder began sitting longer at the dining table. He didn't say much, but he no longer left in the middle of a meal. Finn started asking how to make banana bread, not to cause trouble, but because he truly wanted to learn. Theo left little notes about his days at school, how he got an A in science today, how he went skateboarding with a new friend yesterday. And Ollie, the boy who once only drew mocking words, sketched a picture of Marin standing beside a pine tree, all four boys hugging her. Marin didn't need to ask, didn't need confirmation. She understood that trust isn't something you take with words. It's something that comes only when someone sees you there, day after day, still there. Carter noticed these changes not through stories but through fleeting moments. A small laugh drifting down from upstairs. Children's music playing in the living room. A hand-drawn note falling out of Theo's backpack with Happy Friday scrawled beside a smiling Sunday. And then, one evening, as Carter stepped out of his office to get more coffee, he saw something that hadn't appeared in the house for 2 years. On the dining table, once reserved for silent dinners, were dozens of lopsided, misshapen chocolate cakes. Flowers scattered everywhere, a few burnt at the edges, some that hadn't risen at all. But beside them was a handwritten card in clumsy, childlike script. "You're not my mom, but you make me feel remembered." Below the line were 5 crooked signatures. No one had told the boys to write it. There was no special occasion. Just an ordinary night when all 4 children decided on their own to do something for Marin. Carter stood frozen in the doorway. For the first time in a long while, he felt his heart wasn't empty. He had always thought his helplessness came from not knowing how to raise his children, but the truth was, he had never allowed himself to grieve. He had played the role of the strong father, as if he collapsed, everything else would collapse too. But in that role, he had lost the most essential thing: emotional presence. Marin hadn't taught the boys through skills. She had healed them through patience, by staying, by looking directly at their wounds without fearing she would be pulled under. And now, what Carter saw was not just his children growing up. He saw them opening their hearts again. A little. Once. But enough to know it was real. That night, as the house sank into quiet, Carter stood before the old photo of Elise on the mantel. He hadn't touched that frame in 2 years. But this time, he picked it up, wiped away the dust, and set it back neatly. He said nothing, but in his reddened eyes, something had been released. Not weakness, but a silent admission. He missed her. He still hurt. And now, he didn't need to hide it anymore. Would Carter have the courage to truly step back into his children's lives, not just as a father, but as a man who also needed to be forgiven? The final part will reach the deepest place: truth, redemption, and a second chance. Not all love begins with a glance. Some love quietly grows through long, ordinary days, in moments so small they are often overlooked. And when you finally realize it, you're not surprised. You just feel it's been there all along. The bond between Carter and Maren was like that. There were no sparkling dates, no moonlit confessions, no sudden passionate kisses. Only the sound of running water in the sink as they cleared the table together, the glance they exchanged when Maren soothed Ollie to sleep without needing instructions, or the moment they sat together listening to Ryder play the piano, a song Elise used to love. Each gesture was small, but it was the steadiness of those gestures that made Carter gradually realize she wasn't a stranger. She was a part of this home, not because she forced her way in, but because she had chosen not to leave when every reason to leave stood glaringly in front of her. That winter was unusually bitter. Snow fell thick for 3 days straight, blanketing the entire forest behind the estate in white. Everyone huddled inside, wrapped in blankets, making hot chocolate and playing board games. Ryder brought the electric piano down to the living room, playing a piece for the first time without being asked. Finn read stories to Ollie. Theo brought out book after book, asking Maren about every little thing. No one mentioned Elise, but everyone felt her presence, not as a sad ghost, but as a memory accepted, now living with them in a different way. On the third afternoon, as the snow began to lighten, Carter walked into the living room holding a small wooden box. He set it on the table, right in front of Maren. He said nothing. She looked at him, her eyes expectant but unhurried. Carter opened the lid. Inside was a photograph, not old but not new either. It was taken during a small picnic a few weeks ago, secretly captured by Ryder. In it, the 4 boys sat around Maren, their smiles so wide that light seemed to spill out of the frame. And Carter standing just behind them, his gaze fixed on her. There were no printed words on the photo, but on the back, in thin, slightly uneven ink, as if he had wrestled with it many times before writing, Carter had penned, "You are the only one who stayed when the boys tried to push you away. I don't know what that's called, but I know you are family." Maren didn't burst into tears. She didn't throw her arms around him or say anything grand. She simply sat there, looking at the photo for a long moment, then slowly reached out and took his hand. No need for confirmation, no need for promises. Just a hand clasp steady, the way she held everything in her life. Slowly, honestly, without show. That night the house was as quiet as usual. But something had changed. Not the boys, not Maren, but Carter himself, the man who had once been best at standing still through every storm. This time, he allowed himself to step forward, not to be strong, but to be present. He was no longer the busy doctor playing the role of the perfect father. He was a man learning to love again, starting with the first lesson, learning to stay. And for the first time in a long time, that house wasn't just a place to live. It was a place to love, a place to forgive, a place where, when all that's left is brokenness, someone still chooses to come back. Do you believe that sometimes the only thing that keeps a family together is one person who refuses to leave, even when they have every right to? Leave a comment if you've ever witnessed a love that didn't come from words, but from presence. There are imperfect families, there are nameless pains, but the miracle is, healing doesn't need flowery words. It begins with presence, with someone patient enough to stay when everyone else has gone. This story isn't just about a housekeeper who changed 4 boys or a father learning to love again. It's a gentle reminder that every wounded heart deserves another chance. If you've ever felt you weren't enough, or blamed yourself for not keeping someone from leaving, remember, you don't have to be perfect to be loved. You only have to be sincere. Thank you for staying with us. Don't forget to let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always wonderful to see people joining us from all around the world. Comment 1 if you think this story is worth hearing, so we can keep bringing you more stories like this.